Really, what this seems to be is a way to shut a lot of people up.
P. Diddy under fire once again, this time for allegedly paying off his former artists in exchange for their silence.
You get paid if you don't talk. That sort of sounds like bribery.
So what could Diddy's motive be?
And it doesn't seem like a way anybody would run any business unless they were fearful of something happening to them down the road and was hoping to cut it off.
And could a non-disclosure agreement stave off federal investigators?
Well, I don't think your NDA would ever overrule a governmental subpoena or things of that nature.
These latest allegations come from Aubrey O'Day, who you know from the band Danity Kane. She was first featured on MTV's Making the Band 3 back in 2004, showing the rise of young singers mentored by Diddy himself. Eventually, O'Day became part of the 5-person girl group Danity Kane that signed with Diddy's Bad Boy Records in 2005. The band had multiple songs debut on the Billboard Hot 100 and became the first all-female group to have their first 2 albums chart. Jump to September 2023, when Diddy announced he was giving the publishing rights of songs back to his artists. I asked criminal defense attorney Mike Korbanix about this. So just to start, do you have any ideas why Diddy would want to hand those over to so many artists?
It's a very difficult question because the only thing I think it really could show is if you're working and giving all your business back to those people, it has some sort of inclination that it's to silence them. Quite frankly, I think that's sort of what it shows. It's like, if you don't talk, you can have your money back.
At the time, Diddy told Variety, quote, "It's just doing the right thing. I think that we, as an industry and as a people, have to look in the mirror and make a shift forward. It's about evolving, leading by example, and reforming an industry that needs it in a world that needs reform." This quote is from September 2023, but by November of the same year, a slew of civil suits were filed against the rapper. First, there's Cassandra Ventura, or the singer Cassie's civil suit, alleging Diddy beat her, raped her, and forced her to have sex with prostitutes, among other allegations. That suit was settled just one day after it was filed, but 3 more also arose in November. Joy Dickerson-Neal says Diddy raped her in 1991 and recorded it, alleging she's a victim of revenge porn. Liza Gardner says Diddy raped her in 1990 and later beat her to the point that she lost consciousness. Jane Doe says Diddy raped her at his studio in 2003 when she was just 17 years old. And I think the timeline is a little questionable because this happened in 2023 when it was finalized handing over these publishing rights. And then come November 2023, just a couple months later, all of a sudden we have a couple of civil suits filed against Diddy, some pretty big ones by Cassie, namely, that made waves. And I'm assuming that Diddy's team kind of knew that these were coming. It may have been on their radar based on, I guess, just litigation in general. So is it possible that Diddy may have done this as a way to show the public, hey, I'm still a good guy, before all these claims were made public?
That's such a difficult kind of thing to interpret because all these things are being done in court with legal documents and there's agreements being signed. So it's very difficult to know what the specificity of it is, because you have to look at the actual documents to see what was the agreement and what were the boundaries of what you could do and couldn't do. And then you have to look to say, are those agreements actually legal?
There's another major lawsuit we have to address too, and that's Rodney Jones's civil suit. You may know him as Lil Rod, the producer who worked with Diddy on his recent Love album. Lil Rod filed suit in February of this year, alleging Diddy sexually assaulted him, groomed him, and orchestrated sex trafficking, drug trafficking, and gun trafficking ventures. 1 month later, on March 25th, federal search warrants were executed at 2 of Diddy's properties. So if we're talking about that in the realm of the criminal side of things, again, Diddy has not been charged criminally, as we know, but the feds are working with some people who knew him. We know for sure Cassie has been cooperating with them, likely some of the other people who filed suit or were named in any of the suits. But if you sign an NDA, you still could talk to the feds or investigators, right?
Well, I don't think your NDA would ever overrule a governmental subpoena or things of that nature. And if nobody's challenging it, then it's going to proceed. If nobody's challenging, saying you can't talk and you speak, then you proceed with it. But I don't think that, and I'm not very familiar with that one aspect of it because it's so unique in each situation and we haven't really looked at those documents. But at the end of the day, a subpoena by the government should override a civil agreement that's really more business oriented and is really hiding the investigation.
So what are these latest allegations? We know, based on multiple reports, that Diddy gave back publishing rights to several of the artists he represented through Bad Boy Records. But what are the specifics? We'll turn to Aubrey O'Day for that.
We only get the amounts due since Sony bought our catalog.
Okay.
So streaming for the past couple years, it's about $800, $900, some in the hundreds.
This is an interview from September 2023 when Aubrey appeared on the Barstool Sports show Only Stands. She explained the money Diddy offered was limited compared to the amount she had grossed as part of Danity Kane. But there was another catch too.
And in order to get that, I have to release him for any claims or wrongdoings or actions prior to the date of the release. I have to sign an NDA that I will never disparage Puff, Bad Boy, Janice Combs, or Justin Combs' music or EMI or Sony ever in public.
She says that Diddy said, hey, I'll give you these publishing rights for the NDA, what we're reporting on today. And the specifics of the NDA are what she reveals also. It says that she could never publicly disparage Diddy, Justin Combs, who is Diddy's son and was mentioned in a lawsuit, and Sony as well, that is a defendant in Lil Rod's lawsuit, in addition to several others. Does that NDA make sense? Is that something that would support our theory here?
Well, it really seems to cut on the word disparage. And that sort of is what an NDA is really the basis for, is not to give a negative reputation to the public based on information you have. However, we're in a different court. We're playing on a different court now because it's not a civil agreement. Now we're doing something where there's allegations of violations of the law. And if the government is looking for witnesses, an agreement between two people can't override the government.
In the interview with Only Stands, Aubrey said she believed it was a way for Diddy to silence artists, something she's gone on to repeat in the wake of the latest allegations against him. So are these NDAs something we, the public, could ever see?
That depends on the court ruling, because non-disclosure agreements, I believe, are enforceable. However, I don't believe they're enforceable if they're illegal in the fact that they're hiding factual references to violations of criminal law. So that becomes a whole new thing, because that's really almost, in my opinion, without having further research on it, it basically is saying somebody, here, be quiet, don't do what your legal obligation is if you're subpoenaed or something of that nature to testify.
So what's the point of Diddy having all of these artists sign NDAs anyway, if we know that a subpoena could trump those NDAs?
That's a very good question. But I think at the end of the day, you may come to a point in a situation where you have nothing to lose. I hope they'll abide, but it's sort of like a gamble, quite frankly. Hopefully you're avoiding that it doesn't get to the point, I would assume, where it doesn't get to the point where they're going to have information that they could start an investigation. So if it didn't cut it off right in the beginning, it's a problem.
And we do hear about NDAs a lot just in the celebrity realm, that they make their nannies or associates sign them kind of to keep their personal life a little bit more private from prying eyes. But in the case of this, with the publishing rights, does that sound like something that's normal for Diddy to have these artists sign an NDA in return for their publishing rights?
It actually is something that has so many different avenues to travel with it, because if it's a business thing, and it depends on the intention, quite frankly. What was the intention to that non-disclosure agreement? Like you said, in one instance, if it's to keep my personal life private and I don't want you benefiting or profiting from saying something that happened in my home when you're watching my kids or doing whatever it is, I understand. But then when you put it in the realm of there was a criminal violation of criminal law, and you're not to talk about it, and here, I'm going to give you money. That sort of sounds like bribery. You get paid if you don't talk.
But Aubrey says the paycheck wouldn't be much. In the Only Stands interview, she referenced a paycheck of about $900. But in a new interview with TMZ, she says the deal would be much less. She said she would only get the streaming amount since Sony bought her entire catalog. And she added it up and said it would only be about $300. And then countered saying, okay, so I could get $300 if I sign this NDA, or I could work with Hulu or Netflix or now TMZ, which she has recently appeared on, in a documentary talking about Diddy. So that's going to make me more money. I'm going to go that way. What do you make of her decision there?
That's a tough one for me to comment on because there's so many different aspects of it. I mean, it's sort of that $300 total doesn't seem really on point to me because of the nature of the level of the business and the art form there. I would think it would generate a lot more money, and you would think that there was something you'd have to look at to see really what was in that agreement.
Do you think Diddy was lowballing her then? I mean, he is a multimillionaire, if not billionaire, with many different business ventures that we've been following up on. Likely had a very large settlement in the Cassie lawsuit. We don't know the numbers, but likely pretty large based on her allegations. So Diddy probably has a little bit of money that he could have forked over to Aubrey O'Day.
It's always everybody always looks rich, quite frankly, but you don't know what with their corporations and things of that nature, because how many times are we surprised when we see stars in the news go bankrupt? You're like, how did they go bankrupt? But it's not that easy. Although it's, P. Diddy or whatever star it is, that one person is supported by many people who they have to pay to keep their business going and things of that nature. And when you're talking about all these rights he gave back to people, that was just giving money out. So how you've got to wonder, you really need to talk to an accountant more on that to see how they come to those numbers.
But according to some, not all Diddy artists were forced to sign NDAs in exchange for their publishing rights. An insider told Us Weekly that not all the artists involved with Bad Boy Records signed NDAs, that they were given their publishing rights, but they didn't sign NDAs. So does that kind of counter the theory here that some of the people were being silenced, or could it have been Diddy picked and chose who he would hope to sign NDAs?
It could really work either way. And we really need a lot more information and a lot more facts as to where it was going. It's still, though, it's a very difficult concept for anybody at least for me, to say, why would you be giving your money and rights back if you're in the business of producing this kind of music?
Let's pause this P. Diddy story for a quick second to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime news package. It's stories like this that remind you you never know what's going to happen, and the world is an unpredictable place. So when you're hurt, it can be confusing, it can be scary, and you don't really know where to turn. Well, enter Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. You can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less on your phone and find out if you have a case. If you do, your injury could be worth millions. In the past couple of months, they've gotten verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, and $6.8 million in New York. Also, they have over 1,000 lawyers, so you know you'll be in good hands. So if you're interested, you can start by easily submitting a claim at www.forthepeople.com/LCnews or by dialing #law. That's #529 on your phone. All right, let's get back to that story. The bottom line here is that Aubrey O'Day is saying it was essentially hush money, that Diddy would pay her to be quiet in exchange for signing this NDA. She would then get her publishing records. What do you think about that? Do you think that it really was hush money?
Well, based on what I've read about it, where it was given to so many different people, it seems like that would have some sort of inclination of being hush money, because if you're in business, why are you giving everything back to what you're doing? I mean, it's, to me, a simple way to evaluate it and then move on. But so it doesn't make a lot of sense of why you would have a business. And that would be like me representing clients and saying, okay, here's your money back. That's the way I understand it. And it doesn't seem like a way anybody would run any business, unless they were fearful of something happening to them down the road and was hoping to cut it off.
So where do we go from here? What do you think is ahead for Diddy? Again, we don't have any criminal charges, but we have a lot of pretty severe civil allegations.
Well, it's going to be very interesting when you have criminal and civil things pending at the same time, because you have civil cases where you're going to be concerned about your Fifth Amendment right in fighting those and going forward. Is it worth it, or are you going to claim your Fifth Amendment right and protect yourself as to the criminal cases? We don't know where the cases are going, but as I've said previously, if the federal government's now going across the country to search places on warrants, which search warrants have been determined by a judge, there's probable cause that we need to investigate for more evidence, then I think it would be safe to base your further decisions on the fact that there's pending criminal investigation going on. And where is that going to take us?
So far, we haven't heard much from Diddy's defense, with a few key exceptions. On the federal raids, Diddy's team released a statement calling it, quote, a gross overuse of military-level force, saying there is no excuse for the excessive show of force and hostility exhibited by authorities or the way his children and employees were treated. In response to Lil Rod's lawsuit, Diddy's team says in part, quote, his reckless name-dropping about events that are pure fiction and simply did not happen is nothing more than a transparent attempt to garner headlines. We have overwhelming, indisputable proof that his claims are complete lies. Then there's Diddy's statement from late 2023. It reads, quote, enough is enough. For the last couple of weeks, I have sat silently and watched people try to assassinate my character, destroy my reputation, and my legacy. Sickening allegations have been made against me by individuals looking for a quick payday. Let me be absolutely clear. I did not do any of the awful things being alleged. I will fight for my name, my family, and for the truth. Another question mark we have is Diddy himself, how he's feeling through all of this, because we haven't heard from him. He hasn't spoken publicly. The only thing we've heard was back in December of last year after the first handful of suits were filed, and he basically said, enough is enough. I didn't do these things that are being alleged, and I will prove it. And since then, he's been pretty quiet. Why do you think he hasn't been outspoken?
I'm hoping is because he has competent counsel. And what I'm saying right now is a lot of people enjoy the press, but if you're really going to defend your client, he or she has a Fifth Amendment right for silence, and it should not and cannot, at least in the court, be held against them, because the jurors will take an oath saying, you know, we're just going to decide on the facts here. I haven't read any articles. We're going to go to the facts that are here that we're going to make a determination on. So I believe that's very important. And although people will have a instinct that, oh, if they're not saying anything, something must be wrong. No, if they're not saying anything, they're exercising their constitutional right under the Fifth Amendment.
And Mike expects a long road ahead for Diddy.
If the federal government does charge him, the defense counsel, you got to understand something. If this investigation has been going on this long, and we're talking about documents, and now in the technological age, there are going to be piles of hard drives of evidence that needs to be gone through, with writings, emails now, text messages, posters on Instagrams. So these become highly complex litigation, highly complex defense, because it could take years for defense counsel to go. If it took the government that many years to investigate it, it's going to take defense counsel quite an amount of time to go through what they have, especially since defense counsel won't really know how they are putting it in organization.
While we don't know about a federal indictment just yet, we do know there are a few deadlines looming over Diddy's team. So updates in several of the civil cases are expected in the next few weeks. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.